Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show on India's national television channel Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, India's key strategic partnerships with countries around the world, and also how India is involved in shaping and remaking the existing world order. Viewers, in this episode, we are looking at a pivotal relationship of India with Australia. Australia, India are comprehensive strategic partners, and the scale and the scope of the cooperation between these two vital, near ally-like countries continues to grow and become bigger and bigger. We're going to be discussing Australia-India relations with a special focus on the Indo-Pacific and how these two countries are able to shape the dynamics of this critical region. And to discuss this, I have a very distinguished guest with me in the studio. Let me introduce you to her, the Honourable Lisa Singh.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Lisa Singh is CEO of the Australia-India Institute at the University of Melbourne, one of the important research institutions promoting the bilateral relationship between Australia and India. She's a former senator, a minister, and a public figure. It's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Lisa ji, the Australia-India relationship, it's not an exaggeration to say that it's probably the fastest growing bilateral relationship in our region. And I recall a few years ago, we used to say in India that Japan-India was the hottest thing. But now, last couple of years, we have really made giant strides. We have signed an interim trade agreement, comprehensive strategic partnership. There's been upgrade. It's all looking up. And so I'd like you to share your thoughts. You're in Melbourne, and you're in many ways giving the ideation to, advance this relationship. So sitting there and looking at India, and you're of Indian origin, you've been awarded Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, the highest award of for expatriate Indians in the diaspora. So looking at India from there, and now you're here as well, why is this reaching such stratospheric heights, and what is so special about Australia and India?
Well, as we know, our Indo-Pacific region is being reshaped. And here are two partners, Australia and India, that are taking the values that they hold for the region very, very, very seriously. And for Australia and India, they're shared values. We have a lot of common interests as two countries that really want to play a role in shaping our region, our multipolar region as it's becoming. And I think that's what we're seeing between Australia and India, two consequential partners that want to come together and really play an active role in creating peace and stability. And of course, doing that through building stronger trade links, our economic links you referred to through a comprehensive strategic partnership, but also through our security relationship as well. And I think that's the one that we've seen a really heightened lift in terms of foreign policy and defence. Here are two countries now that have a range of military exercises, naval exercises. Australia in itself is going to be the host of Exercise Malabar, in fact. Yes. So there is so much for us to do together if we want to share this vision for our Indo-Pacific region, let alone how we support and work with Pacific Island states, the small island states, ASEAN. As two countries, we very much strongly support ASEAN centrality. Yeah. I know that India's played a strong role in signing its own comprehensive strategic partnership with ASEAN. So there's a lot we can do together, and that is why you are seeing this lift between both Australia and India, because we have developed a really trusted partnership.
Yes.
Consequentially, because of what we know is going on in our region, and that is we want to see not one country dominate the region, but like-minded countries coming together through a shared set of common interests and values such as peace, stability, international law, the rule of law, and that is what Australia and India uphold.
Absolutely. Now, Lisa, the question for us in India when we look at Australia also is, the multi-partisan, bipartisan, consensus about India that has emerged. I mean, you've been in politics in Australia. I mean, go back 10, 15 years, there was a sharp divide between left and right on these issues about China and India. But now it seems like whether it's Labour or Conservative or whichever party is in power, it doesn't matter. They are continuing to advance the India relationship, and seeing this, it must be very heartwarming for you, because you believe in this relationship and you want continuity of this strategic partnership going forward.
Absolutely. You have not seen any change in the strong Australia-India relationship under the Albanese Labor government. In fact, I think you've seen an even stronger commitment to India from the Albanese Labor government. It's the very first thing that our Australian Prime Minister did after being sworn in as Prime Minister was to fly to Tokyo to meet Prime Minister Modi and other Quad partner leaders through that Quad Leaders Summit. There's been a continuing growth between Australia and India since the election of the new Labor government, and I'm so pleased to see that growth continue. Of course, Australia and India today are such strong partners compared to being on the opposite sides of the Cold War blocks some 4 or 5 decades ago.
That feels like ancient history, huh?
Ancient history, but of course we're in a new history now, one that we want to play a role in reshaping. And that, yes, as you say, has been borne by the fact of some of the activities of China, of the dominance of China, be it in the Indian Ocean or through the Pacific and through the Pacific Islands countries. So that geopolitical tension has certainly created a stronger Australia-India relationship. But I tend to think that our relationship goes beyond that. We are two democracies. We both have an interest in ensuring that we create resilient supply chains. That's been another consequential outcome. And that's really important, very important for Australia, particularly when we look at the issues that India wants to progress through the G20. As G20 chair, I know India can play such a strong role as a leader and is doing in clean energy. Australia wants to be, partnering with India on that, looking at how we can create a stronger renewable energy supply chain landscape.
Absolutely.
We've got the critical minerals, and I know that India wants to do the sort of manufacturing to make that clean fuel happen.
Absolutely. So there's so many points of convergence Lisa Singh is talking about. Geopolitical and regional, of course, is a very central aspect. Viewers, on this, I'd like you to listen into the foreign ministers of our two countries, Penny Wong and Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, about our shared vision for the Indo-Pacific. Let's hear these two important policy makers and continue the discussion.
Australia and India are comprehensive strategic partners. We are Quad partners. We partner in many other ways, and most fundamentally we share a region, the Indo-Pacific region. And between our countries we span a great breadth of the Indo-Pacific with our own areas of deep connection and expertise. We've got a shared interest and we share an ambition, and that is our region being stable, prosperous and respectful of sovereignty, where countries are not required to choose sides but make their own sovereign choices. We don't want to see any one country dominating or any country being dominated. We both recognise our region is being reshaped economically and strategically, and I think our partnership is a demonstration that we understand that this period of change is best navigated together. I make this point from the Australian government's perspective. We can only build and sustain the region we want by working with others, including by working in partnership with India. And for Australia, this partnership is a critical part of shaping the region we want.
I think from what I can see, the Australian view is very much aligned with the thinking which I have put forward. For me, this relationship is exceptionally important, and I can only underline that by the frequency of my visits, that it is exceptionally important. It would, for us, make a big difference in the G20, in the Quad, bilaterally, and I think regionally as well. I'm coming here after spending 3 days in Fiji, so do bear in mind that the India that I represent today is also an India whose influence and interest and footprint is growing in the world. We feel we can be of utility and support in regions which may not be that proximate to us. So that too has been part of my conversations in Australia.
So viewers, you just saw the foreign ministers talking about the region, and Lisa ji, you are originally Indian origin from Fiji, and that's your background, and the Pacific Island region is of course the backyard for Australia historically, and there is clearly Chinese penetration of that region. They're trying to enter into security pacts with small island nations there, and essentially push out Australia and the US from what has historically been their zone of influence. So there is a direct challenge there. And here in India, in our so-called backyard also, in Sri Lanka, Maldives, to a lesser extent Bangladesh, and the Indian Ocean region, we also feel a similar kind of a expansionist challenge. And in that sense, our experiences are very similar. We are both trying to make sure that there is room for us to have a say and to have our own zone where we are influential. So you are, given your Fiji background and given how involved Australia has been in that region, what is the thinking and how can India come in, you think, in this picture, or how could Australia come in here to Indian Ocean? What could we do more in the Pacific Islands and of course in the ASEAN region, where we could complement each other's strengths and ensure that, as the ministers were saying, that no single country is, got hegemonic control over this space?
Look, I think this is where the Australia-India relationship can really take off in our region, because this is where we can work both bilaterally and multilaterally. I know that our foreign minister, in fact, has just been in Fiji for the Pacific Island Forum, and as your foreign minister has just been in Fiji for the World Hindi Conference. Yeah. Two significant visits by both of them, because again, it's showing a commitment to small island states, not just in the hard power areas of security, which of course we know is important, particularly when China is trying to sign deals to sort of shore up resources and ownership of certain areas of the Pacific. But more in terms also of humanitarian assistance, of looking at the environmental issues that face the Pacific Islands nations. These are areas where India is leading the way. The Solar Alliance, that Global Solar Alliance India has led on, very important for our Pacific Island neighbours. And I also know that India, I think it was something like 33 years since an Indian Prime Minister visited the Pacific, was the first done by Prime Minister Modi in 2014. I remember that visit very distinctly. So that Act East policy, I think, of India really shows a commitment to the Pacific and to small island states. And similarly, you see that from the Australian government. Our foreign minister has had so many visits to the Pacific and really said we are here to listen, to not lecture, and to really be a strong Pacific partner in the region. We see the Pacific Island as our neighbour, of course, in Australia. So strong commitment there, but a lot more, I think, that the two nations can do together. Similarly, can also happen in the ASEAN region. Some of that, I think, is happening through the Australia, India, Indonesia trilateral agreement. Maritime,
three big middle powers, yeah.
Very good, yeah, exactly. Very major three major powers in our region, really driving and shaping what this new multipolar region will look like through maritime cooperation. And I think similarly, the exercises of maritime shared interests that happen through AusIndex and Pitch Black, there are a number of them happening between Australia and India together bilaterally, are also really, really important to helping shape the region, but also to sort of put out a message that these are two countries that really want to play an active role to create peace and stability and cooperation, which is what we heard our foreign ministers mentioning there. I have to say, though, that in my current role, post-politics, one of the highlights was, and very early in this role, was to host your foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, at our University of Melbourne. And I got to be in conversation with him at that very large forum, where he made it very clear that he said in the top 5 countries that India takes seriously, Australia is right up there.
It's right up there.
So, you know, we similarly take our partnership with India very seriously, and we're seeing that not only through these sorts of formal agreements, through this comprehensive strategic partnership and our new interim free trade agreement called ECTA, which is obviously in Hindi is a word meaning unity, right?
Yeah, ECTA also means
yeah. So, you know, very formal ways, but also then through these other minilateral or multilateral opportunities through the Quad, through trilaterals, and playing out through the Pacific and ASEAN.
And presumably these smaller countries, if Australia and India and Japan, for example, or with the US, I mean, in, you know, small groups, they come in and offer assistance support for infrastructure or healthcare or, you know, build, you know, projects or skill capacity building, those sort of things. I think we should, that's the way forward, isn't it? I mean, otherwise, when we say the region, we are shoring up the region, it should have some concrete, you know, basis to it. And like you said, it cannot be just maritime patrolling and naval activity. We have to focus on development of these small island nations.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, I take my hat off to India for playing a role there. They created that Infrastructure Resilience for Small Island States initiative, IRIS. Again, Australia was very quick to come on board and support India with that, because we know it will develop that infrastructure that's so much needed in the Pacific, particularly when it's facing all sorts of climate change outcomes through, you know, the natural disasters of hurricanes and cyclones and the like. So there's a lot of work we can do that is capacity building.
And there's the Japanese Partnership for Quality Infrastructure. We have a supply chain resilience initiative. Actually, in terms of concrete institution building, Australia and India are doing a lot. You know, it's not just hot air that we're talking about, viewers. And it's important to keep in mind that this relationship also involves other powers. So let's expand this discussion a bit. Let's hear from the US Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, along with the Australian Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles, where they're talking about the US-Australia relationship in defense and how it's strengthening. And it has an, you know, it's tangential to what India and Australia are doing, and we'll come back to that. But let's hear the tightening of the US-Australia defense relationship.
The United States and Australia have long-standing ties of trust and friendship, and we're both deeply dedicated to freedom and to democracy. We also share an unwavering commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific, a region where all countries are free to choose their own destinies, and where states respect international law, and where disputes are resolved peacefully without coercion or intimidation. These shared convictions run deep, and they are the foundation of our unbreakable alliance. Today, the region and the world face a growing challenge from autocratic countries attempting to change the status quo through threats, coercion, and provocative military activities, and even naked aggression. We're deeply concerned by China's aggressive, escalatory, and destabilizing military activities in the Taiwan Strait and elsewhere in the region. The Deputy Prime Minister and I had a very productive discussion about steps that we can take as allies to enhance deterrence and strengthen security in the Indo-Pacific. We talked about enhancing our interoperability and expanding our operations and advancing our ongoing force posture initiatives and deepening our defense industrial cooperation. We talked about AUKUS, which I'm pleased to say has made tremendous progress over the past year. We also had a good discussion on the renewed importance of the trilateral cooperation with Japan.
US alliance system, there's been an effort to reinvigorate it, and of course Australia is a treaty ally of the US, and AUKUS, the Australia-UK US military alliance, has also been newly formed and is making rapid strides. Lisa ji, in this context, there's been a lot of interest in India about AUKUS, and there have been some calls even, should India join AUKUS? What about Japan? You know, should we all also come in there? But of course, we have a Quad as well, and there's some overlapping membership in these two. But overall, the Australian establishment and even public opinion, it seems, has moved in a direction where they are in favor of stronger this force posture and security cooperation with the US, right? I mean, and that also helps because India-US strategic partnership is also growing. So in that context, how do you see our defense relationship? Because it looks like Australia is leaving no stone unturned. Like they have that old historical, US alliance, but now there are all these almost de facto alliance-like arrangements with India. Now we have mutual logistics agreement. Our militaries have interoperability. We're doing more joint exercises, as you've already mentioned. So it looks like they are clear about their security goals, and they are doing it despite, threats and, backlash in form of trade measures and other things by the Chinese. So where does India fit in with AUKUS and with Australia's, enhanced defense posture that we are seeing? They're also committing to higher defense military spending as well in the coming decade.
Absolutely. I think one of the messages I heard very clearly there from the US Secretary of Defense was this shared conviction for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, of course, that is something the US and Australia share, but it's also something that the US, Australia and India share. So that is where the relationship plays out at the Quad level. For Australia, of course, though, we have a very long-standing security relationship with the United States that has been going for over 70 years now. But I think what we've made clear is what we would like to see is the US playing more of a role economically in the region as well. When we talked about supply chain diversification, which I know is being looked at through the Quad, this is where India plays a really important role. Even if we look back at what's just occurred through the COVID-19 pandemic, India, was stepping right up there in vaccine manufacturing.
Yes.
There is so many other ways we want to shape that free and open Indo-Pacific. That's not just your usual sort of hard security areas, but looking at those sort of environmental security areas, humanitarian security, food security, many ways in which we can come together in a stronger partnership. That aside, Australia and India aren't sitting back and thinking, well, there is all this other sort of architecture in place. We don't need to keep strengthening our relationship. We certainly are, and you raise the MLSA as an example of that. I think that can go even further. I think, though, on AUKUS, there's a lot of discussion at the moment about whether or not we should have India and Japan as part of AUKUS. AUKUS, of course, is a long-term game, whereas the Quad I see is an alliance. It's a security alliance, but a broadening out of that security relationship of 4 like-minded countries that can really play an impact in our region today. AUKUS, however, has that longer strategy, particularly for Australia in terms of our submarine capability. Having nuclear-powered submarines is at the heart of that AUKUS arrangement. I know that India and the US have a very long-standing bilateral relationship. In terms, I think, when I look at Australia, for example, I do look at the US and India relationship and how the diaspora have been very much part of building the bilateral relationship.
Of course.
And that's something we can learn in Australia. Of course, the fastest growing diaspora community in Australia is the Indian diaspora. It's nearly a million people. It's really grown quite rapidly over a short space of time. And it's fantastic to now see, just looking back at the 75-year anniversary of India's independence, our Sydney Opera House lit up in the tricolours.
Right.
Same with our old Parliament House in Canberra, something that Minister Jaishankar got to witness. This is us really taking our relationship seriously and seeing that our diaspora can play a key role in that.
Absolutely. So cricket, curry and commerce, and then there's the diaspora, and then maybe in a negative sense also China, and there are so many others you can add on. Last word, Lisa ji, on the future for India-Australia. We are 2 important pillars to make this Indo-Pacific become a reality. I mean, it's a construct, and if I'm not wrong, it's only the very term Indo-Pacific came from Australians to start with about 15 years ago, and it's then become mainstream, and we have all adapted to it. So Indo-Pacific, Australia's commitment seems ironclad. I mean, they're really, and we are suddenly finding that there is a willing partner there, and that's why India is, I think, also warming up so much to Australia. So what's the future? Are there any areas which I think are critical for this relationship to go forward in the region?
Look, Australia clearly has a shared vision for the region, and that vision includes India as a strong partner. You know, we want to see our economic relationship grow a lot more than it currently stands. We want to continue our strong security partnership. We want to ensure that we, play our active role through other sorts of groupings like ASEAN, through our Pacific Island neighbours, and through other sorts of trilaterals. We haven't quite touched on the India, Australia, France trilateral,
Yes,
which is
it's
another
something
one.
we are trying to revive now after a bit of a...
Absolutely, yes. Of course, Australia has a much better relationship with France now under the current Albanese government. So now we can really advance the Australia, India, France trilateral through, again, looking at those environmental security issues, critical technologies, cyber security. There is a lot more that Australia and India can do together, and I'm looking forward to that.
A lot more that we can do together. Sky is the limit, Lisa Singh says. And, viewers, there's also a lot of litmus tests coming up. The region, we are seeing unilateral conduct by China, which is affecting the sovereignty and security of a lot of smaller countries. And let's hope that there is no big crisis over Taiwan or over the South China Sea or an Indian Ocean country which may require military action, but you can't rule out. And that will be ultimately the test of all these key strategic relationships. If there is a big crisis, how will Australia and India stand up shoulder to shoulder? But we're preparing for it. And I want to thank Lisa Singh for sharing original insights and for also for the work that you're doing to advance our bilateral relationship. It's really commendable.
Thank you, Dr. Chaulia.
So viewers, do think about this big relationship, Australia, India. We are just making rapid strides and in a way it's non-problematic. There's nothing at all which can be seen as a conflict of interest between the two sides. And in that sense, sometimes it's off the radar but quietly behind the scenes, we are doing a lot of work to make sure that this architecture in the region for Indo-Pacific is in place so that whenever there is trouble or crisis, we are all prepared for meeting these challenges. I'll see you again next time, and until then, take care.